Just days after the high-stakes Xi-Trump summit, Putin touched down in Beijing for his own summit to mark 30 years of China-Russia strategic partnership, signing over 40 agreements. What do these two back-to-back meetings mean for the global order? We'll discuss this and more on this week's China Report. Welcome to the China Report. Every week, we'll be helping you sort through all the propaganda with an independent view of the country that we're taught to hate, but know so little about. I'm your host, Amanda Yee. These are this week's headlines. Following President Trump's state visit last week, China's Ministry of Commerce has confirmed on Wednesday that Beijing will purchase 200 Boeing aircraft based on commercial and air transport needs. Meanwhile, the United States will guarantee China a sufficient supply of engines and spare parts. These outcomes follow consultations held on May 12th through 13th in South Korea, just ahead of Trump's state visit to China from May 13th to 15th. The two sides also agreed in principle to discuss a reciprocal tariff reduction framework on products worth $30 billion or more per side, with affected goods expected to enjoy most favored nation or even lowered rates. Beyond trade volumes, the Ministry of Commerce stressed that China's export controls on rare earths and other critical minerals are carried out in accordance with laws and regulations, with license reviews for compliant civilian use applications. The ministry expressed willingness to work with the U.S. to create favorable conditions for mutually beneficial corporate cooperation and to ensure the stability of global industrial and supply chains. Could humans one day be born in space? China is now investigating by sending artificial embryos to its space station to study the effects of zero gravity on early development. Project leader Yu Liqian, a professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, told state broadcaster CCTV that the goal is to understand how the absence of gravity impacts reproduction and to explore potential technologies to counter those effects. Can humans survive and reproduce in space? I hope the answer is yes, he said, framing the experiment as a first step toward eventual human settlement beyond Earth. China's newest quantum titan, Zhejiang 4.0, has officially shattered the boundaries of computational speed by solving a problem in 25 microseconds that would take the world's fastest supercomputer trillions of years to finish. Published in the journal Nature, this breakthrough represents a massive leap for photonic quantum computing, utilizing particles of light to process information. By scaling up from previous iterations to manipulate over 3,000 photons, the research team at the University of Science and Technology of China has effectively demonstrated a quantum advantage that makes traditional binary supercomputing look stationary by comparison. The technical triumph lies in overcoming the photon loss that typically plagues large-scale optical networks. To prevent information from vanishing in the circuitry, the team engineered a high-efficiency light source and a hybrid-coded architecture that allows photons to interact across both time and space. This innovation achieved a record-breaking system efficiency and paved the way for fault-tolerant processors. As part of China's strategic 15th five-year plan, these advancements signal a shift from theoretical experiments to the development of scalable special-purpose quantum machines that could soon revolutionize industrial applications and complex system simulations. President Xi Jinping has called for a rapid acceleration in building a uniquely Chinese intellectual system for philosophy and social sciences. By moving beyond imported frameworks, the goal is to foster knowledge and theoretical innovation that stems directly from the Communist Party's modern theories. Xi noted that since 2012, the nation has already seen a steady rise in high-quality research, setting the stage for a more assertive and independent academic identity. This intellectual shift is designed to do more than just fill libraries. It aims to provide concrete answers to the pressing questions of the modern world. By aligning academic rigor with the practical needs of the people and the times, the initiative seeks to fuel the broader engine of Chinese modernization. Ultimately, this push for high-quality development in social sciences is intended to project Chinese wisdom onto the global stage, ensuring the nation's academic voice is as influential as its economic power. Well, immediately off the heels of the high-stakes Xi-Trump summit last week, Putin arrived in Beijing yesterday, for his own meeting with the Chinese president, as the countries mark 30 years of strategic partnership. To walk us through both of these significant summits, we're so happy to have back on Zoon Ahmed Khan. Zoon is an analyst and fellow with the Center for China and Globalization, and she's a leading expert on China's foreign policy. Zoon, welcome back to the China Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you back on again. As I said, Putin arrived in China yesterday. It was announced over the weekend following Trump's state visit that Putin would be flying into Beijing this week for his own visit with Xi. And both attended a ceremony where they signed over 40 agreements today, which span technology, trade, scientific research, and intellectual property. And I'm sure the details of some of these agreements will be revealed over the following few days. But Zoon, you're in Beijing right now. Overall thoughts on the summit, and what is the significance of this meeting, especially so soon after the Xi-Trump summit?
Well, firstly, there's a lot to unpack. This has been a very important week in Beijing. And I will also bring a context that this entire year, we saw a lot of leaders coming to Beijing, which traditionally may not have prioritized close partnership with China. So, for example, you saw Keir Starmer coming, Carney from Canada, and then, Trump and Putin coming literally in the same week. I feel, first of all, this indicates China's very firm commitment to moving away from a zero-sum mindset, to really pushing for a multipolar world, a world where different ideas, different ideologies can really coexist. And that really, China's willingness and China's keenness to work closely with the United States does not mean that China would sabotage or not prioritize its partnership, its strategic cooperation with Russia. And that is really one of the cornerstones of modern China, rising China, China as a superpower. It is setting that tone and that precedent, which I feel all of us know the global South has for decades talked about. We don't want to choose between East and West. Our political ideologies, our development progress, our ways that we choose to develop and govern ourselves should not affect who we can work with and who we can cooperate. And we want to move away from bloc politics. And China has consistently said that for decades. And I feel especially, since the BRI, we saw that we call it the second phase of reform and opening up, right? It's more extroverted, it's more outwardly, it's really engaging the world at large. China was working closely with the Europeans, with Global South, with different regions in the world on common agendas. And China consistently at that time also said that we don't believe in bloc politics. The fact that China doesn't push any ideology, which is what we saw in the Cold War, right? That was the standard set for the world. And somehow everyone's trying to put China's rise within the same prism. China verbally saying that may not have convinced a lot of people, but I feel the way China is now especially working as a great power, working closely with both Trump and with Putin and with other capitals in the world is showcasing that it is possible to be a great power, to be a rising power, and to work pragmatically, coordinatedly on issues that affect both countries in a way that's effective without choosing one over the other. So I think this is one of the biggest messages that we are getting from the fact that these meetings happen so closely together. And I think also, if I were to look at, we know that obviously it's the 25th anniversary of a very important treaty between China and Russia on good neighborliness and, strategic cooperation. This is the 30th anniversary. So these are both very significant milestones in the bilateral relationship, especially in the post-Cold War era. Both countries have become strategically very close. We know that they've also built a very important multilateral regional mechanism, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, together in these years, right? The Shanghai Five started in 1996. From when the strategic cooperation, the strategic partnership of China and Russia starts, basically. So they both have been consistent in working bilaterally on very holistic agendas, whether we talk about technology, trade, people-to-people ties, energy cooperation, etc. That these all have been, consistently the breadth of the cooperation, the bilateral relationship has evolved. And then both of them have also consistently worked on making the region more united, more cohesive. I would say, the SCO is an important example of an organization in a region that needed this kind of connectivity and building of trust. So I feel, the timing is important because it showcases China as a global power that truly has a multipolar vision. And an ideological vision that is compatible with, so to speak, different ideologies. And China is working also in a very central capacity in the world. It is important for Trump to come to Beijing for many reasons, including his own domestic agendas, and also if he wants to achieve some of his priorities, which mean, some regional issues that they have been involved in. And it is also important for Putin to come to Beijing to discuss how to further their bilateral cooperation, how to also express very vocally, which they have, that they both stand for the UN Charter, for a more just, a multipolar world. This is what both sides have consistently worked on. And in that sense, Beijing is really at the center of global politics, without pushing an ideology, without pursuing bloc politics, without pursuing, alliances that target another party. And I think that's a big achievement for China, really.
Well, as you said, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the China-Russia Strategic Partnership and the 25th anniversary of the signing of the China-Russia Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation, which they, I believe, signed an extension to today. So the China-Russia relationship is seen as one of the most stable in this really turbulent geopolitical landscape right now. So I think a lot of analysts and perhaps even Beijing see it as like a model for major country ties. So, could you elaborate on how you see the China-Russia relationship and why do you think it's remained so friendly and stable over the past few decades?
I mean, long story short, in a nutshell, given where we were, I think, when people our age started building an interest in politics and geopolitics, really, we were exposed to this idea that a powerful country, a global power who wants to lead, needs to convert others to become like itself, right? Or it needs to control others. And this was the American hegemonic model, and it continues to, be like this. I think whether we talk about how we've studied or understood international relations as a discipline, or we talk about, the famous clash of civilizations or the end of history ideas. I mean, these have really influenced people in how they can conceive two great powers to work together. They can get along if one follows the other, if one bows down to the other. Another interesting thing is, when it comes to ascending powers, right? We know that obviously China's status, China is ascending as an increasingly important global power. What that means, from my perspective and my research, is really that China is being seen as a country that can help address existing challenges in the world. And that status, comes from delivering practical results to the world. Whether it's SDGs, whether it's the BRI, whether it's other cooperation agreements. And I think what really, China and Russia demonstrate when it comes to this changing world where the status of major powers is shifting is that they are firstly not trying to convert each other. They're not trying to dominate each other. They're not trying to disrespect the sovereignty or the political system or the partnerships of the other. They respect the other country's vision or ideas. And I think that mutual respect is something which was formerly seen as impossible in two countries that could have so many differences. And let's also not forget that there has been a history of very deep cooperation between China and, at that time, the Soviet Union. There was a lot of technology transfer. China's first wave of industrialization and capacity building really was, in partnership with the Soviets. But then there was a period of difficulty in that relationship. And that's when, when we look at the Deng Xiaoping era, there was close cooperation with the United States. And maybe an interesting, piece of information for your viewers could be that actually the US-China cooperation in the 80s and 90s was obviously very important for modern China as we know it today. But there was also a realization that the Americans did not share technology, did not share their knowledge the way the Soviets had in the past. So there really was, precedent of technology transfer, of people-to-people cooperation, of working on a vision that helps both. And when we come to the post-2000s and the late mid-90s, when again the relationship, they both realized the importance of cooperation, the importance of working together in a region that had been affected by, the Afghan war. There were so many challenges that needed to be addressed. There were also within the Central Asian region, there needed to be some issues needed to be resolved at that time. So they both came together to really address those issues. And now they are working together in a way that is not negatively impacting the strategic or the core national interests of the other. And I feel that is really the most fundamental thing about the China-Russia partnership, the strategic cooperation, the relationship. They might have different ways to deal with many challenges. They might have different development trajectories. They have different political systems, of course. But in the end, they respect one another. And I think another very important aspect is that we are, as everyone knows, in an increasingly multipolarizing world. And both China and Russia advocate for a more multipolar world. They're advocating for a world where there is more justice, there is more respect for the UN Charter, there is more work towards the real goals that the international community has agreed upon, which is in the end, the SDGs, development, progress, resolving issues in a way that's more diplomatic. And I think that both of them becoming, stronger as countries that are delivering this. Being, in a way, co-constructing more multilateral fora, whether we talk about the SU and also BRICS, of course. All of that, this relationship, this partnership, and this trust between China and Russia is creating space for a more multipolar and a representative world. And I think in that sense, they both, have this common vision, and they have had this vision for decades, essentially.
You spoke a little bit earlier about this tradition of technology and scientific transfer between China and Russia, China and the Soviet Union. I just wanted to bring up that today Xi and Putin also held a joint press conference where they launched a cross years of education program, which includes the launch of an Institute of Innovation Studies between St. Petersburg and Tsinghua universities. And that's to deepen scientific and research cooperation between both countries, with Xi saying that both sides could train top-level specialists and strengthen the research potential of both countries. Beijing also announced today that they were extending its visa-free policy for Russian citizens up until the end of 2027. So I think these two things are just very indicative of China's approach to development, approach to international relations, one that's based on, people-to-people exchanges and what they would call mutually beneficial cooperation, right? That the world is so interconnected, and knowledge and research that could benefit humanity should be shared and be a collaborative project.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm from Pakistan, another country with a very strategic and a very, multifaceted relationship with China. And whether, you look at the China-Russia strategic cooperation, you look at China-Pakistan, you even look at, China on more multilateral fora, the focus is very multidimensional and holistic. And I think, this really comes from China's own development success, of course. They realize that investing in education, China has the world's most sophisticated and advanced technical and vocational education as well, which is something that many countries, even many advanced economies, would envy. China has top-tier universities. China has also immense synergy between universities, between research institutes, between industries and governance. And that synergy, it really has helped China advance a modernization, a development that is unprecedented. And I think it will remain unprecedented in human history. It's not that they didn't face their challenges, but it's that they really understood how to create those ecosystems of knowledge, of people's, of also, people underestimate the extent to which China has been able to include people's creativity in the process of its own development, of its own modernization. You look at any small village, any small county, the solutions are very localized for addressing their economic challenges. And those solutions are with the people who, with their expertise, are able to bring the economic mandates of their counties, of their districts forward. And that is also the vision that China takes with other countries. A bilateral relationship cannot be strong, cannot truly be synergized if people are not a part of it. China has prioritized exchanges between universities. Many Chinese top-tier universities, obviously Tsinghua is the number one university in Asia and one of the leading in the world. They have cooperation agreements with so many countries and on a very technical level, So China prioritizes that when it comes to Russia as well. And with many people, I'll also point out that, China was less understood 10, 12 years ago. A lot of it was also because fewer people were traveling to the country. The Chinese government scholarships really opened up a lot of the world, whether you talk about Europeans, Americans, people from the global south, even Russians, to come and really understand China. And now China understands that we need to further expedite that process of people really coming in with fewer restrictions. The visa-free policies, the visa-free entries have made a massive difference in how people are perceiving China in a world where disinformation exists. So extending that further to the Russian people also is, compatible with China's a strategy which is very people-centric, not only in its own domestic development, but also when it comes to bilateral relations with other countries. And we also know that, about actually the education exchanges between China and Russia are already very advanced. I was just looking at the numbers, almost 50,000 plus Chinese students and researchers are based in Russia, and I believe it's almost 20,000 or more of Russians in China. You also see a lot of Russian companies, a lot of Russian products, very popular in China. So they want to, further expand and expedite that. And that obviously benefits people on both sides. And we know that both of them, have some very advanced technologies that can be benefited further if they work in tandem, if they work, in a more collaborative, in a more scientific, in a more strategic sense. So that understanding has existed for years, and I feel both of them find themselves in a period where they both have immense expertise and a lot to share with the others and to teach each other. And that's obviously where the partnership is equal. So a relationship, any country cannot develop without the right investment in education, in research, in understanding each other, right? Think tank exchanges, cooperation. This is all important for Chinese people to understand Russia from a Russian perspective and vice versa. We know that this has happened under the BRI between China and various other countries. So that dimension is critical. Young people are very important. Also, if you look at President Xi, the way he has focused on youth in China, and internationally, young people, I still am part of the Global Young Leaders Dialogue Program. And, the way the country under President Xi has focused on youth exchanges is also exceptional. And that extends again to Russia. So it speaks a lot. And I think the world can really benefit from the rise of a power, the rise of a China that is truly in a very substantial way investing in research, education, and innovation. It's in the end for young people, the next generation, that'll be the problem solvers of the challenges that we all face.
Well, I want to pivot to another extremely important summit that happened recently, which is, of course, the Xi-Trump meeting. And I want to talk a little bit about the media coverage that's come out on both sides. Looking at both the English media versus like how they covered it in China, it's very, very stark, very night and day. In the US, media coverage described the summit as somewhat lackluster. that it ended in a stalemate, that nothing really came of it. Trump got Xi to commit to buying something like 200 Boeing aircraft, but it was still short of what they had expected, and that wasn't any real movement in terms of ending the Iran war. On the Chinese side, it's much more optimistic. It's being characterized as a reset of US-China relations, a new chapter in their bilateral exchanges. So what do you make of this discrepancy? And, what do you think more accurately reflects reality?
Firstly, the contrast is not shocking. For China, in general, maybe your viewers already know that they have a special term on Chinese social media for Trump. And that is, that translates to nation builder. What they mean is not he's building the American nation. What they mean is that, Trump's policies in the first term, the way, he initiated the tariffs and the trade war and the technological, limitations, whatever, the strategy towards China, even post-COVID, all of that galvanized China's resolve to be more competent, self-reliant in a way to advance even faster than they would have. Whether that's true or not, remains on one side. But actually, Trump, because, last time he was here in 2017, it's been almost a decade since an American president landed in Beijing, and that president was Trump. The summit went well at that time as well, but right after, his strategy towards China was anything but friendly and cooperative. So 9 years on, the tables have turned. China is stronger. China's economy has literally doubled. It's 70% of the US economy today. China is not embroiled in a war that is unpopular. He's not approaching a midterm election, which he needs to win, right? I mean, Trump really faces a lot of challenges. The kind of inflation and the kind of challenges in the United States right now also put him in a position where perhaps he needed some very big wins. From the Chinese perspective, they look at the situation in a more long-term way. Firstly, they do not blindly trust Trump. I think they've learned that because after the previous summit, we know the policy shifted. But what they do understand is that Trump may be in a position right now, politically, that he really does need to work more cooperatively with China. And the fact that you have so many American leaders, congressmen, politicians, talking about the China threat, and Biden initiated so many. He really got the allies together to address and tackle the China threat. But Trump, on the other hand, has taken that initiative to think of the relations from a more strategic perspective. And for China, I think that is a big win as well. If an American president can think of great power relations between China and the US beyond a zero-sum prism, and think of it as perhaps we need to strategically cooperate with one another, that is a big win. Whether or not this is going to last, because as we know, there is a lot of backlash within American politics about Trump's very open visit, and Trump's perhaps, maybe he's even seen very close to Xi Jinping, etc. He has received some domestic political backlash for this as well, on the one hand. But the fact that he is more pragmatic today when it comes to the relationship is a positive thing. It is positive for both sides to sit together and say that we need to address the issues we face, and we need to at least aspire towards great power relations that are not just attacking each other, but set up guardrails, think about bigger issues we face, and think about where we can really cooperate. And there are many areas of cooperation that were discussed. So from the Chinese perspective, this is a success. That the visit happened, it went well. Both sides, Trump appreciated China, recognized China's role as a global power, and he wants to work on issues. We know that the meeting in Busan was also, discussing some of the, especially when it comes to trade, tariffs, fentanyl, etc. They were able to work towards not addressing those issues, but setting committees and setting, mechanisms to be able to tackle or talk about those issues without saying that, okay, we need to harm one another. And the Chinese perspective has always been that we need to be able to cooperate. So that is a bit win for China, the fact that this meeting happens, and they can at least envision a dynamic which is not coercive, but which can be more like a partnership. From the American perspective, I think there are all sorts of criticisms, right? I know that some of them are really just criticizing for Trump, even the fact that he went to Beijing. But the media coverage, perhaps they expected some big cooperation agreement, but they wanted some big headlines, some maybe this many billions of investment coming and creating this many jobs. And I think that is reflective of the kind of big wins that the American economy perhaps needs at this point, right? And China doesn't really need those kinds of big wins. China is working with many parts of the world very effectively, very cooperatively, and they just want more stability in the world. And for the United States, for Trump, for his own MAGA mandate, he needs more economic results. And that hasn't really, so far, nothing very substantial has come out of it. So I feel like the expectations are different. And generally in China, whether you talk about perceptions of the people, they don't see America as that kind of threat that perhaps China has been made to be, right? The suspicion with which they view China is different. And Chinese people, I think an average Chinese person really understands America much, much more deeply than American people understand China. So I think that mismatch of expectations was inevitable.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't exist, but that's just how the world is.
No, that actually makes a lot of sense once you explain it, how the Americans were looking for these like big short-term wins versus how the Chinese view everything in like a much longer-term perspective. Yeah. In the Chinese readout of the summit, it said that Xi and Trump agreed on what they called a new vision of building a constructive China-U.S. relationship of strategic stability. That would be the framework that would guide relations between the two countries for the next 3 years of Trump's term and beyond. So what do the Chinese, they always like to create these kinds of terms that I always feel like are a little bit of a mouthful. So what does constructive strategic stability mean to the average layperson?
I put this down. So she elaborated on what this means. So firstly, constructive strategic stability should be understood in five dimensions, right? A positive stability, obviously this means that not a zero-sum mindset, right? So where cooperation is the main focus of both sides. So this is a positive stability where they are not thinking one's loss is the other's win, and instead thinking what we can work on together for both sides to benefit. So this is one aspect. A healthy stability where there is competition, but it stays within healthy limits. So you don't try to destroy one another's technology. You realize that healthy competition is the reason why countries or economies and societies have been able to advance at all. Look at how much competition there is within China, right? And that healthy competition, whether it's EVs or whether it's other domains, it has helped the country move forward. And that kind of healthy competition is what should exist between the US and China. Then a constant stability that they need to think of the relationship in a more long-term perspective. And I think this is where, again, President Trump can have that mindset. He may think, he may genuinely think that now, given his domestic mandate and given the health of the American economy, etc., and he is not your quintessential imperialist, if I'm not sure if everyone here agrees, but he is not the one getting all the allies together against the China threat. He's really thinking about in a relatively more pragmatic sense than perhaps the previous administration. At least that's my view. So he might think of a constant stability, but how constant really is he to the US policy, right? Whereas in China, they can really envision the next 10, 15, 20 years. So from the Chinese perspective, a constant stability really means that you think of the relationship from a long-term perspective. And again, that's nicer thinking for Beijing than it is for Washington, given that China's economy is only growing and the weight or the significance of China vis-a-vis the U.S. is also increasing. Then he talked about a lasting stability, which President Xi described as expectable peace, right? So you need to think of, again, a stability that's not confined to that is beyond geopolitical challenges and changes. Think Russia China strategic cooperation, right? The world has changed in these last 3 decades. So much has happened, but that basic understanding and that resolve to work together remains, and that is what the China-U.S. Partnership or relationship could be. And then, I mean, generally, positive stability and cooperation, I think from the Chinese perspective, is how great power relations can work, is the only way for great power relations to work in an increasingly multipolar world, where both the U.S. and China and other major powers accept that they need to coexist. They share this space with other countries with different, again, systems, development mandates, experiences, histories, and they need to really coexist in this space. And they need to recognize that, an unhealthy competition, whether it's AI, whether it's other advanced technologies, is only going to individually make them worse off as well. So I know some of the terms, and especially, if any of your viewers have read the books on Chinese political systems and philosophy, some of the terms might seem heavy, but it's also because China really envisions its trajectory, its relations with other countries or regions in philosophical terms. These ideas, firstly, are based on principles that are based on a historic perspective. And then those principles can be further, fine-tuned into specific policies. And what I see, I mean, for anyone who thinks maybe this is too flowery or this is too much of an aspiration, actually China has conducted its foreign policy with these philosophical principles. And China has already worked on various initiatives, like the global initiatives, again, the development, security, civilizations, and global governance initiatives, right? For some people, again, they might seem very philosophical, very vague, but in the end, they are translating into mechanisms that are helping address civilizational, promote civilizational exchanges, or address global governance deficits, or promote global development, or promote peaceful cooperation, and when you talk about the GSI, promote solutions to conflicts or misunderstandings, and solutions that are not war-driven, right? So in that sense, this idea of a strategic stability between US and China is actually logically the only way a multipolar world can thrive or even exist in a stable sense. That stability will require both to think of the relationship in a more long-term perspective, in a perspective that includes other parts of the world. It includes also how they are seen by the world at large. And at this point, I think maybe in our previous conversation also we discussed this, I think the world is really observing which great powers are working in a way that is constructive for the global community, and which ones are working in a way that is sabotaging technology transfer, development, overall well-being of the world at large, climate. There's so many challenges. So if there is a possible way for two great powers to coexist and to individually thrive in a multipolar world, then this is the only perspective that really exists. And there is no alternative. There is no way to destroy China somehow. It's a massive country. It has immense inertia. The only way is to accept and to work together and to be the best of what the United States can be at this point.
Mm. Well, I do want to bring up one major difference in between the White House reading of the summit and then what came out of Beijing. During Trump's visit to Beijing, and as noted in the Chinese readout, Xi called Taiwan the most important issue in China-U.S. relations, whereas in the White House statement that came after, Taiwan wasn't mentioned at all. So we're seeing the very real potential of some kind of military crisis in the Taiwan Strait, especially with Japan pushing to
Mhm.
revise its pacifist clause, moving more toward remilitarization. Just a few weeks ago, the Philippines hosted the biggest yet Balikatan military drills with the US.
Mhm.
And as part of those exercises, they deployed American missile systems within, shooting range of Taiwan, just 100 miles south, I believe. So, after this meeting, Trump seems to be delaying a $14 billion arms sale to Taiwan. So, how do you make sense of all this? How do you see the US approaching the Taiwan contingency moving forward after this meeting? With the failure of Trump's trade war and the failure of Trump's war on Iran, China came into this meeting with the upper hand. Can the US continue using Taiwan as a pressure point after this?
You know, the fact that China had the upper hand is something where there is a consensus in the Chinese and the American media. Anyway, there was an interview that Trump did. I mean, where he mentioned that in the end, Taiwan is an island, and China is a great power, right? Again, and that again, Japan, the direction that Japan is going in, whether it is because of the Indo-Pacific not really being mentioned by the Trump administration, or they think that this is a strategic opportunity for them to show that they can really contribute to Trump's efforts, the way the Europeans sort of decided not to. So I think Takaichi has a motivation to at least showcase herself as an ally who can tangibly, help Trump, help the United States in these situations. I mean, I think they're also looking for a strategic shift at this point, and that's an unfortunate direction the country is going in. But I mean, there's a lot to unpack on this. I feel personally that Trump's priorities are, given how the Iran war has gone. I truly believe that, and this is, I guess, the broader consensus. They thought this would be very swift. Maybe they genuinely believe that by killing the leader, somehow there will be a shift of power, and there will be a more pro-washing. There will be a revolution, another revolution. And the opposite has really happened. Even people who were protesting certain policies of the Iranian government are now supporting, and the world is really critical of what Washington has done. So given the situation they find themselves in, this is also an increase. You're in New York, so you can be a better judge of how unpopular this has been within the United States, especially given his very economic agenda that did get him elected. I think within the Trump administration, given his limitations, given where the American economy is headed, and given the Iran fiasco that needs to be addressed, I hope that the mediation efforts are successful. But there's a lot to be done on that. I don't think it would be wise, especially with the midterm election approaching, to really start Taiwan as an issue. And I feel, again, the interview that he did, there are a lot of voices in the United States that support using Taiwan as, again, as a chip, as a pressure point for China. But how successful can that really be, given the various challenges that the U.S. is facing? I think that's questionable. So in the medium term, again, this is my reading. In the medium term, I don't see President Trump doing that, because he definitely wants some significant wins, economic wins, vis-a-vis Beijing. But we do not know what the next administration will pursue. And perhaps the direction that Japan is going in might incent. And again, we saw with the Philippines, right? There might be other administrations that may think this could be a way to curb China's rise or influence. But in the medium term, at least within Trump's administration, I doubt this could be something they initiate. That said, there was obviously a very positive meeting between the Taiwan's opposition leader in Beijing, right?
Right.
Between her and Xi. And I think that also sent a very important message that there are significant voices, significant political voices within Taiwan that do not want this kind of intervention. They feel this is not safe for the people of Taiwan, and I think with time, especially given that over 180 countries, practice the one China policy, it is illogical for the world at large to support any such interference in Taiwan. So with time, I think in China there's a confidence. A lot of scholars here believe that gradually, with time, peaceful reunification is the only way forward, and it's inevitable. It's just a matter of time. And given that the U.S. is facing many other challenges, it would be unwise to stoke this. Given domestic unpopularity and economic issues, and the economic challenges that they're facing can only be addressed in partnership with China. So that's in a nutshell. I mean, I'm a relative optimist on this. I know there's a lot of heat in the region. There's a lot of coverage of it. I know Japan wants to go in a certain direction. I think Japan is a power that has benefited immensely from aligning very closely with the US. It has inflated Japan's importance. They see this as also for their economy. This is one of the industries, the military industry, that they think can somehow support their economic goals. But in a nutshell, I don't think the US would see it in its medium to long-term interest to really push that far with Beijing. The Beijing that's becoming influential, respected, and increasingly powerful.
Okay. Well, that's that seems like a good assessment. I hope that Trump, finally realizes that working with Beijing is the only way forward, and not, constantly create this policy around this like posture of aggression. So
Agreed.
thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Zoon.
you.
It's
Thank you
always
so
such a
much.
pleasure to have you.
I know time just flies. But I'll just quickly add that I really feel that Trump does at this point represent, at least vis-a-vis China, a pragmatism that I think should become more mainstream in the US. And I feel, I was not very recently, over a year ago, I was in the US, and I feel a lot of people don't hate China. Like more than 50% of Americans don't really hate China at all. So
there's definitely been
possible.
a shift. Yeah. There's definitely
Yeah.
been a shift in public consciousness and public thinking around China, especially after COVID. In the past few years, and especially just seeing what has impacted it has been seeing China's rise, and then like this more information coming out of China through social media, different Chinese influencers and people in the States, seeing the different kinds of things that the government provides for its people, while at the same time, the economy here is just really tanking. As you mentioned earlier, Trump is really reneging on a lot of his promises about like improving the economy, making things more affordable. And people here are seeing that and, gradually realizing that, Trump is, he just basically lied to get elected. All the while China is providing all of these different things to their people. And they're starting to see like what an alternative society can look like, and that we can have these things.
Which could be scary for the leadership in the US, right? But at the same time, they cannot ignore the domestic issues, right? So the world is really becoming, smaller in a way. Like there is no way to completely limit the access of an average American to what's happening in China. So I feel, in the end, what people think and their well-being really does matter. So I personally don't see a reason why there should be a mistrust or just hate towards China from especially the American public. And that shift is positive. I think the vision set out by the Xi-Trump meeting is possible. It's possible to really implement that. It is the only way they can both thrive. The people on both sides can thrive. So that's...
Yeah. Well, Zoon, maybe do you want to let people know where people can find you if they want to check out more of your work?
Twitter. Follow my Twitter. My Instagram is too personal. But if you like cats and babies, then follow me on Instagram
Mhm.
and some cultural developments. But yeah, Zoon Ahmed Khan is my Twitter handle.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And we look forward to
Thank
having
you.
you again.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Born and raised in Japan, Hina Zhang is a professional erhu player who has been trained on the instrument since the age of 4, traveling back and forth from China. Earlier this year, she played an erhu rendition of Future's Mask Off at the halftime show for the Portland Trailblazers, which went viral on TikTok, racking up over 1 million views. That's our show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you soon on the China Report.